Change. Such an interesting topic. Such an interesting word. The simplest definition of education is change. It's also the shortest definition of education. And so today, on the OBR Presents, my hope is that I can provide just a little bit of education about change and how it happens. So welcome to the OBR Presents. I'll be your host today, Jared Mueller. And as we talk about change, it's interesting to note that it's all around us. Change is happening. The weather is changing. Rain today, sunny tomorrow. The flowers are in bloom. Your kids, they're out of school or about to be. Jobs are changing. Seasons are changing. You are changing. It's going on all around us. So what do we do with it? How do we deal with it, or how do we change? First, let me tell you that for 13 years I've been a mental health professional. It's from that background, as well as a Browns writer and analyst for the Orange and Brown Report, part of the Scout Network, is that I come to you today. Because change is all around us. Change is happening all the time. I would even argue that change, like a peak, is what's happening to you every day. I would argue there is no plateaus, that we never stay the same. We are either getting stronger in our habits, we are repeating them over and over again, therefore making them a stronger part of who we are, or we're changing our habits. We're trying something new. And so our habits are becoming actually weaker in some areas because we've decided to try something different. Later you'll learn that strengthening of habits is called the maintenance stage. And that change, that trying something new, is the action stage of change. But before we get there, the question becomes, is all change the same? Obviously the answer is no. Some of you are dealing with significant changes. Your kids are going off to school, to college in the fall. You maybe lost a job. You're making decisions that are tough in life. Others of you are making decisions about changing where you get your deli meat. And no, we're not talking about Matthew Dellavedova, the Cleveland Cavaliers scrappy Australian player. But some of you are trying to make a decision whether to go from Ford to Chevy or Chevy to Ford. Some of you are deciding whether you should go to Applebee's tonight or whether you should try Chili's. Some of you get your groceries at Aldi or Kroger and maybe are thinking about going to Walmart. Yet others of you are dealing with some very significant life struggles, and this is not meant to demean those at all. But in the end, while all change is different and it has different categories and even has different levels, we've found that change in and of itself has some very, very basic things that go along with it, some stages that go along with it. Coming out of the solution-focused therapy is an idea of the stages of change. We're going to get into that today as we discuss Johnny Manziel, both on and off the field, and how change and his stages of change are impacting what is happening with him. But for you, much like every client I've had over the last 13 years, I'm going to give a little piece of homework so you can understand a little bit more about how you change. We've all heard the saying, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. It's a saying that is for us to understand we're all the same. What you may not know is each individual person puts a certain leg in first. I put my right leg in first. You might put your left leg in first. So the first part of your homework, and maybe even think about it as we go through this video today, is to figure out which leg do you normally put in first. Then, let's just say for the next couple days, you put the opposite leg in first. Let's find out how you, the Browns fans, our loyal readers, and now loyal watchers, how you deal with change. How difficult it is for you. How often do you forget? How frustrated you get at me for giving you the homework? Do you just blow it off? because it's not important. We'll find out a little bit about how you change as we continue to talk about how change and the stages of change are impacting Johnny Manziel and the Cleveland Browns. So why even talk about it? Why this subject today in the off season? As at least down here, the grim overcast skies look like we're going to get some more rain. Why talk about change on a sports site, on a site dedicated to bringing you the best Browns coverage we can? Well, it's because of that. It's because we want to give you the best Browns coverage we can, and so a unique perspective is always an important part of that. Andrew Brandt, Darren Ravel, they have their perspectives from the business side of things and marketing and those kind of things. And so my perspective as a mental health professional hopefully provides just a little bit of perspective for you. So why change? When we talk about Johnny Manziel, we're talking about the future of the Cleveland Browns. Whether that future is just this year, or whether that future is for 10 years from now, all the way through to the end of his career, Johnny Manziel will be a part of Cleveland Browns history. Whether he is a footnote of another poor decision, or whether he is a shining beacon as the finally a replacement for Bernie Kosar, Johnny Manziel and his change will be decisive for the Cleveland Browns. He may not even start this year. Josh McCown, the veteran that we picked up in free agency out of Tampa Bay, is most likely going to start. So Manziel's future really isn't likely to be this season. But there are two areas that change is an important topic for Johnny Manziel and the Cleveland Browns. The first is off the field. Off the field, even today's news about a heckler and Johnny Manziel throwing a water bottle at him and the different stories that we're getting out, off the field, Johnny Manziel has significant change left to do. His time at rehab hopefully was an important step for him, and we wish him well. The fact that he was in rehab for so long is a good sign. But still, Johnny Manziel has spent most of his life getting exactly what he wanted, with everything working out, with everything almost being handed to him, and not really having to put in the work to achieve greatness. It's kind of like the movie Limitless, where Bradley Cooper's character is taking the drug, and he didn't have to climb up the rungs, the bars. He didn't have to date the right people and get to know the right people. The pill took him where he needed to go. Those skills that he got. Well, the same thing for Johnny Manziel. His money got him his family's money got him the best coaches and best teachers and best access to things. His athletic talent allowed him to be successful in the rugged and tough SEC to the point that he won the Heisman Trophy. Yet, at least in his first year with the Browns, his physical talent is not enough to allow him just to not work. So off the field, both not using substances, putting in the effort, and putting himself in good situations is something that Manziel is going to have to change. It seems like his time in rehab, and let me be clear, the length of time he was there and the rehab that we know he went to, we feel very good about, or I feel very good about, the clinical process that he went through as a mental health professional. But that change is just starting, and you're gonna learn here in just a couple minutes what that process looks like. But for Manziel off the field, there's a lot of change. There's a lot of habits that have to be changed. But then on the field, an argument that has gone back to when the Browns drafted him, and even before that from many draft analysts, is what would be best for Johnny Manziel. Heck, what would be best for Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, Teddy Bridgewater, Blake Bortles, Geno Smith, all on down the line? There's some who say that the only way quarterbacks get better is by getting on the field, getting reps, starting. Still others believe in the old school method of letting a quarterback develop. Johnny Manziel, different than an Andrew Luck and different than even a Teddy Bridgewater, falls into the latter category, in my opinion. That's both as a sports analyst and as a mental health professional. So it is those two areas that the stages of change, going through them and recognizing where Johnny Manziel is going to be an important process for both the quarterback and the team. But we hope that for you, this video, this time, will be a learning experience so that you can better understand Johnny Manziel, what he's going through, what he's experiencing, and maybe even what you're experiencing sometimes when you deal with change. Change is difficult. Some of you have already tried your pants homework. You figured out which leg you put in first. You've wondered about trying the opposite. Some of you believe, Jared's an idiot, that's no big deal, that's easy, I can do it. Get back to me in a week when you've tried it for 7 straight days. Others already have a good idea that for them change is very difficult. They do everything in their power to stay the same. And honestly, that's most people. Most people create habits. We say often that all behavior has a purpose. So you know that change is difficult. Have you given that kind of grace and that kind of mercy to Johnny Manziel as he looks to make changes in his life? We hope as we go through this process of the 5 stages of change that you better understand Manziel, society in general, and even yourself. So now we'll look for those. We'll start to look at those stages of change. Change is such an interesting, fun thing. But man, is it tough. The first stage of change is likely where we found Johnny Manziel last year. Manziel was in the pre-contemplation stage of change. Pre-contemplation is exactly what it sounds like. This is someone who is not yet contemplating that they need to change. Either they think they don't have a problem, they think they can't do anything about their problem, they blame the problem on situations, things that have happened to them, where they've been in life, their family structure, addictions, habits, you name it. Someone in pre-contemplation is unlikely to change. Johnny Manziel last year thought that he could get away with not really investing off the field as a quarterback to develop new skills, to develop pocket awareness during practice, to not use substances, to not party, to be the same guy that he was in college. And it makes a lot of sense. He was successful in college. Pre-contemplation only happens when there starts to be problems. The people around you, the world around you, your spouse, your kids, your employer, your friends, they start to notice that maybe there's some problems. For Johnny Manziel, we maybe should have noticed this when he wasn't able to beat out Brian Hoyer, a mediocre career backup quarterback who has a lot of heart, who led the Browns to some very important wins, but in preseason struggled greatly. No one, even the Brian Hoyer supporters, thought that Hoyer looked good in the preseason. The problem was Manziel looked worse. That was tough to do. So there should have been some signs early in Johnny Manziel's NFL career that he was in the pre-contemplation stage of change. Pre-contemplation is often the most difficult place to move out of. It's hard to recognize where and what you can do to change. Sometimes it just seems far too difficult. Why try? I've done it before. Some of you who smoke, and again, no judgment, have tried to quit over and over again, and it just hasn't worked. You've tried the patches, you've tried cold turkey, you've tried to flip yourself with a rubber band, you've tried accountability, and it just hasn't worked. That's actually relevant here with Johnny Manziel, especially when we think about the possibility of substance issues. Research tells us that about 8 times someone has to try to get sober before they can. Now that's on average. For Manziel, we hope that this is one time and done. But for most others, it takes multiple steps, multiple attempts, which also means multiple failures. And those who have failed, and even if that hasn't been a struggle for you, maybe you failed giving up soda. That's my issue. I would say that I have a slight addiction to Coca-Cola. Some of you have struggled to give up video games. Some of you have struggled to give up certain restaurants, certain food that you know is not healthy for you. Some of you have struggled to communicate better, even though you have problems with the marriage. Some of you have struggled just to take care of your finances a little bit better. It's very tough. Change is difficult. And so for Johnny Manziel, off the field, putting in the effort, pre-contemplation. I was good in college, I'll be good in the NFL. On the field, there seemed to be a lot of pre-contemplation as well. Johnny Manziel, when we saw him on the field, took one read and then looked to take off and run, or to at least escape the pocket. It worked in college. It didn't work so well in the NFL. And so the pre-contemplation stage is a stage where someone does not believe they have a problem, does not believe they need to change. It's a tough place to be, but many people walk out of the pre-contemplation stage and into the second stage of change. Now it's important to note that these aren't linear. You don't go from 1 to 2 to 3 automatically. You can go from 1 to 2, back to 1, 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, back to 2. There's a lot of bouncing that can happen. And for Johnny Manziel, as he progresses, we expect there to be a lot of bouncing, because that's what happens with change. It's difficult, it's tough. But from the pre-contemplation stage of change, we move to the contemplation stage. Yes, makes a lot of sense, right? If before I wasn't contemplating a problem, now in the contemplation stage, I start to have an idea that maybe there are some changes that I need to make. Maybe I have an idea that things aren't working well. For many people, the contemplation stage of change doesn't happen until there's some negative influences in their life, negative impacts. So for Johnny Manziel failing in his rookie year in the NFL seems like a pretty big failure. Seems like a problem that really pushed him to say, maybe I need to make some changes. Off the field, starting to contemplate, think about possibly going into rehab, is where Johnny Manziel started the contemplation stage of change. We know that because he ended up in rehab, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But the contemplation stage of change is an important stage. This is where someone is trying to understand what they could do better. Is it possible? And do they have any hope? The contemplation stage of change, often, though many people have hit rock bottom, provides them a feeling of hope for the future. For Johnny Manziel, who knows where this came from? Was this something that his family talked to him about? Did he have someone he trusted? Was it his girlfriend? Was it the Browns organization, Jimmy Haslam, Ray Farmer, Mike Pettin? We don't know. But at least off the field, we know that Johnny Manziel has gone into the contemplation stage of change. He realized that how he was living his life was not okay. Going to Aspen, Memorial Day weekend. He didn't do that this year. We'll get to what stage that is. But partying in Vegas, he didn't do that this year, so far at least. Even today's trouble that was from last night, that was at a golf tournament. A place where we know Johnny Manziel loves golf, but it wasn't a party scene. That's not a party atmosphere at the Byron Nelson. It's a golf tournament. It's generally a place that is subdued and reserved. Unfortunately for Manziel, and I covered it a little bit today, that's kind of the price of fame for him right now. It's a blessing and a curse. But off the field, we can see that he's contemplated the possibility that change is necessary. On the field, we don't know yet. We don't know if he understands the work that needs to be done both in the film room and on the field. Does he understand the changes that need to be made from Johnny Football, who dominated at Texas A&M, to Johnny Manziel, the one-time hopeful quarterback, starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns? The NFL is a different monster. Some quarterbacks, Teddy Bridgewater, Andrew Luck, and I'm not just talking about them because of their skill level, even Russell Wilson, as a drop back passer in college, well, they can transition pretty quickly into the NFL. Not just because they're good, but because the system and their abilities match up pretty well. While Johnny Manziel is always going to be mobile, he is going to have to develop as a drop back quarterback, as a pocket passer. If he can't do that, the best we might see is Michael Vick, RG3, exciting players who haven't excelled in the NFL for a variety of reasons. We hope for more from Johnny Manziel, our first-round pick. Is he contemplating change? Does he realize that he needs to do things differently? If he does, then the OTAs, the training camps, the time spent at the Browns facilities in Berea, that time will be spent contemplating what needs to change and then stepping into the third stage of change. The third stage of change is the planning stage. This is where not only do I recognize that I need to make a change, but I actually make a plan. Off the field, we know that part of Johnny Manziel's plan was to go to rehab. Not only did he go to rehab, but he went to rehab in Ohio, near the Browns. That is a solid decision. That's a solid plan. Instead of returning to Texas, where he's a hero, where everyone knows him, where he is a part of a family where wealth is abundant, instead he stayed in Ohio, a place where, while he is known, he's not as revered. Planning, in the planning stage of change, we move out of contemplating whether we want to do something, can do something, and into, this is what I'm going to do. Oftentimes, plans are very, very specific, and they should be. I need to make a plan to go to rehab for at least 21 days. I need to go to this rehab because it's one of the best. I need to stay. I need to have people to hold me accountable. Making a plan does not guarantee success, but it's hugely important. You, probably like me, have decided we need to make a change and then just start trying to change. But without planning, that action is a failure most often, because we don't think through all the unintended consequences, all the things that could frustrate us, bother us, get in the way. And so the planning stage is vital. Hopefully for Johnny Manziel, the off-the-field plan made things make sense as he put it into action, which is going to be the next stage of change. But on the field, it's a different story. Some of you want to see Johnny Manziel on the field. The problem with that is in the planning. If the plan is to put Johnny Manziel on the field and hope that somehow he has changed his mechanics, he has changed the way he processes the defense, he has changed his willingness to stay in the pocket, that plan has not taken into account his habits. Without time to practice, without time to put our plan into actions, we will always revert back to the way we've always done things. When the bullets are flying, we revert to our habits. All of us do. Some of you are trying to give up cussing. Good job. Proud of you for that. Yet, when The car gets hit. Someone rear-ends you. You get some bad news. Kevin Love's arm gets pulled out of socket. Man, that was terrible. Oftentimes, that's when a cuss word will slip out, right? So you have a plan, but the practice hasn't been there yet. That's where the fourth stage comes in. That's the action stage of change. As we move to that, the action stage is where we believe Johnny Manziel is. So let's talk a lot about the action stage of change. And that brings us to our last two stages of change. So we're going to cover those together here. The fourth stage of change is the action stage of change. This is when I put my plan into action. This is practice. For Johnny Manziel, off the field, this is when he got out of rehab and went back to living his life. You can't just practice inside of rehab. Much like people who are in jail or prison can't just practice behaving there, because when they get out, they go back to their normal lives. The action stage of change is often when we struggle the most. It's when the bullets are flying, when things get difficult, when we get frustrated, when we get tired, when we're hungry. There's a health, when I'm hurt, when I'm envious, when I'm angry, when I'm lonely, when I'm tired, and when I'm hungry. Those are times where we struggle to put our plan into action. And sometimes our plan just isn't good. Sometimes we start to put our plan into action and realize it's not going to work. And so we have to go back to the planning stage. For some people, this is when they go back to the contemplation stage. Do I really have a problem? Can I really do anything about it? Am I really able to be successful? A lot of tough questions happen when the action stage of change doesn't work out the way we want it to. But what if we practice and practice and practice? Off the field, Johnny Manziel has had a little bit of time to practice. Spending time with his girlfriend, hanging out with his friends, going back home, even going to the Byron Nelson Classic. Johnny Manziel has had time to practice. Off the field, we hope that Johnny Manziel's actions will continue over and over again until they become habits. That's going to be our fifth stage of change. But what about on the field? For those of you that want to see Johnny Manziel starting, Johnny Manziel has not had the time nor the repetition to practice how to be an NFL quarterback. What he has practiced is being Johnny football. Tucking the ball and running, scrambling around trying to make plays, first read and then done, not throwing his receivers open. All the things that we need to see out of Johnny Manziel to have any comfort that he can be the future of the Cleveland Browns. He hasn't had time to practice. He hasn't been in the action stage long enough. Even the time that he's getting now in OTAs is not good enough, is not going to be enough. Training camp, OTAs, everything in the off season. Most likely, based on what we know about change and the change principles, will not be enough time, will not be enough practice for Manziel to make the significant adjustments from college quarterback to starting level NFL quarterback. Enough to make the changes as a mobile scrambling quarterback to a pocket passer. There just may not be enough time for him in the action stage of change. So instead, what we hope for Johnny Manziel is that he gets to be in the action stage of change throughout the rest of the season. During practice, during extra time, during film study, that Johnny Manziel gets enough time to practice his new way of both thinking and acting. Muscle memory is something that's talked about often with athletes. Johnny Manziel's muscle memory, starting here in his head, and then with his feet and his arm, is to scramble, is to move, is to make things happen. If he moves out of the action stage of change too quickly on the field, that is what he will revert to. He will not have enough time in the action stage of change to make new habits. If we go back to the pants homework, some of you may try to put on the opposite leg maybe tonight. Maybe you've already tried it. Maybe you paused this video and said, I'm going to try that. Some of you might try it for a couple days. But I can promise you that for a majority of you, at least 75% of you, you will probably make it 3 months. Research tells us that those who have had a heart attack 3 months later are eating and exercising the exact same way they were the day they had their heart attack. You have a possibly life-threatening situation happen that could be related to and definitely have some influences in your exercise and eating habits, and yet 3 months later, research tells us 75% of those people are back to eating and exercising the exact same way they were. This is no judgment. It tells us a lot about how people change. We struggle. To expect Johnny Manziel, just through some off-season OTAs, training camps, to change how he plays quarterback from how he has played quarterback all of his life is a little ridiculous. The same way to expect you to change how you put on your pants, since you've been putting on your pants that way pretty much since you were 4 or 5 years old, is a little ridiculous. Yet, if you put in the effort, if you stay in the action stage of change for about 6 months, most likely we know that you will then have changed which leg you put in first. That is, the 6-month period is what we know, generally speaking, moves people out of the 4th stage, the action stage of change, into the 5th stage, the maintenance stage of change. This is what's known as habits. Remember at the beginning I talked about peaks, how we're either getting stronger in our habits or we're changing our habits. Well, first we have to establish those habits, and when we go to change our habits, we need to have a long period of time in the action stage where we're consciously, constantly making effort to make changes. At around the 6-month mark, we then enter the maintenance stage of change. This is when it becomes normal. This is when, for Johnny Manziel, off the field, not going to parties, not drinking, not hanging out with people late at night, not reacting negatively to situations and to problems. When that becomes normal, that becomes what he does. For me, that was going from a quiet kid in high school to what can only be described as a little bit of an outspoken person in college. That was a process that is now normal. Some people wish I'd go back to the way I was, but many people who meet me today laugh at the idea that I used to be once a quiet, shy kid. But it was true. Those who know me in high school, when I went back for my 5-year anniversary, were confused. That's because I went through the stages of change to the point that now in the maintenance stage of change, I have the habit of being a very extroverted, outgoing person. That's where we hope Johnny Manziel can get. That he can go from the party guy, the fun guy, the drug and alcohol guy, whatever his struggles were, to a little bit more serious, to a little bit more focused. And the same thing on the field. So that when Johnny Manziel takes a snap and he looks and the receiver's not open, that his natural instinct isn't just to pull down the ball. That his natural instinct is to look at how to throw his receiver open, how to look at his options at 2, 3, and 4. Look at those reads to find the best place. And then and only then, if the pocket collapses, does he look to escape? Does he look to scramble? It is our hope that through OTAs, through training camp, and then through this season off the field with the snaps that he'll get, especially because Josh McCown won't need as many as the season goes on as a veteran who has a lot of experience. Not saying he's great, but that Manziel will get more and more snaps, more and more practice, more and more time in the action stage of change so that his habits, his maintenance stage of change is strong. So that he doesn't look to sidearm passes, doesn't look to scramble around to make plays that just don't work in the NFL. It's in the maintenance stage of change that we want to see Johnny Manziel get, both on and off the field. And that's why the stages of change are so important. That's why it's so important that Johnny Manziel get time in the action stage of change, so that he is strongly embedded in his new habits, strongly embedded in his maintenance stage of change. If not, if he's only in the action stage of change for a short period of time, we know that most likely he will revert back to his old habits. There won't be enough time for him to develop the new ones. So that's where we are with the stages of change. Pre-contemplation, contemplation, planning, action, and then finally the habitual stage, the maintenance stage, where it is just how we are. For many of you, you have gotten there. You've made changes in your life, both purposely and subconsciously, and now those are who you are. That's how you are. Some of you, this came when you got married, some when you got kids, some when you hit rock bottom. For Johnny Manziel, we hope that this off season, as well as this season, will be his process in the stage of change. We know it's going to be difficult, but the stages of change are clear. They are a part of the solution-focused therapy for a reason, because we want to solve a problem. For Johnny Manziel, it's pretty clear. There's been some problems. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you sticking around. And you've learned a little something about how we change as people. Now, a little disclaimer, this is not a counseling session, so you can't count it as one. I'm not providing you counseling, just information. For other mental health professionals, sorry, you will not get CEUs, though my counseling agency, I am in charge of our training and education department. But for the rest of you, I hope this has been a learning experience. I hope you understand now why you will hear from me, and most likely the rest of the Orange and Brown Report, why Johnny Manziel needs time. He can't prove it. He hasn't been in the action stage long enough to have his habits be perfect. While this little situation at the golf course was not a big deal, even a little of his old habits, throwing his water bottle at this guy, this 18-year-old kid, shows that it takes time. On the field, the Johnny Manziel we saw last year and the Johnny Manziel that was at Texas A&M won't cut it. He'll get cut. The best thing for Johnny Manziel is to stay in the action stage of change, to practice his new way of living and his new way of being a quarterback. Does that mean we want to take away the excitement of Johnny football? No. We want that to be what happens after Johnny Manziel goes through the process of being a pocket passer, of going through his progressions, going through his reads. Right now, off the field, Johnny Manziel has gone, it seems like Johnny Manziel has gone through from pre-contemplation to contemplation to planning and now he's in the action stage. He's making a concerted effort to change how he lives his life. All the credit in the world to him. If he is never successful on the football field, that process will be vitally important to his success in life. On the field, we're not sure. We don't know. We've heard from we've heard from players, we've heard from Mike Pettin that there's a different Johnny Manziel. So that tends to tell us that he's gone from pre-contemplation to contemplation to planning, and he's starting to put it into action. The problem is, on the field, that muscle memory, both in his head and in his arm and in his feet, and how he sees football, he's trying to unteach years and years and years of how he's played. And he's only had a couple weeks. OTAs, film study, those kind of things. There's not a lot of time, especially with the new CBA, for Johnny Manziel to go through the process of putting his plans into action, practicing and practicing and practicing, to the point that he gets into the last stage of change, the maintenance, the habit stage of change. We want what's best for the Cleveland Browns. Right now, Johnny Manziel is the only option on our roster that is for our long-term future. Connor Shaw has a lot of heart, doesn't have the arm strength, just really doesn't have the ability. I think he could be a great backup quarterback. Thad Lewis, interesting, but most likely not. There's a reason he's been on so many teams. So it's Johnny Manziel. Listen, if he fails, next year we draft a quarterback. But what the Browns will know that we may not know is how he's doing with the action stage of change off the field and on the field. Even if he never gets into a game for the Browns, we'll have a really good idea from the Browns what they've seen in practice and in the film room. If he doesn't get on the field but they still draft a quarterback in the first round, it may be a sign that they just don't believe he's able to do it. Whether he's put the actions into place and it's become habit and he's just not good enough, or if he just cannot break his old habits. Either way, drafting a quarterback next year in the first round probably means the end of Johnny Manziel in Cleveland. But until then, we're going to continue to root for what's best for the Browns. And a Johnny Manziel staying in the practice, in the action stage of change, will help change all of his habits on the field so that he can become the quarterback we need him to be. He's not that right now. Thank you for tuning in to the OBR Presents. You can follow me at Jared K. Mueller, JaredKMueller. You can follow the Orange and Brown Report at the OBR. And you can come to our site for all of our great articles and analysis and news. It's at cle.scout.com. We look forward to continuing our video series, The OBR Presents, throughout the season as we bring you the best Browns coverage possible. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great day.